The well was ancient, easily as old as the oldest houses in Bycastle, the original village from which Naughton and its twin town, Barton, had expanded. In recent years, the Friends of Naughton Conservation Group had undertaken some restoration work. Loose stones had been securely mortared, and a new peaked roof had been built over it. Though it had a crank handle, rope, and bucket, none of it worked. The crank wasn't meant to turn. The well overlooked the River Mead at the eastern edge of Bycastle. Where once open fields stretched along the riverbank, now stood the parking structures of Naughton Centre, Tower Gates Mall, the Meadside Business Park, and the sprawling towns of Naughton and Barton. Though the well's water was kept fresh by the river, it was also nourished by a stream that ran close by, passing under a footbridge near the riverside. The stream wended its way through the town, flowing past Hurley Park, and originated from the ravine on the southern ridgeline beneath the Crackshaw estate. I looked up at the ridgeline, then traced the hidden path of the stream through Naughton Heights and Deer Barrow before it disappeared underground, crossing the Occam trading estate. With a sigh, I turned back to the well, leaning on its edge and gazing into it. I wished that my problems could be as easily solved as dropping a coin into its depths. Wouldn't that be nice? Maybe then, I could fix the mess I'd made of my life. It wasn't all bad, though. I had Mona, my girlfriend. We shared a small, ground-floor flat in Ashfield, though it was damp and cramped. We loved each other, and after 4 years together, people started to expect us to talk about marriage and kids. That was laughable. We could barely afford a holiday, let alone a wedding or kids. Most of my problems were career-related. I didn't really have a career. I'd grown up in Naughton and never excelled in school. Despite my mother's encouragement, I'd failed the entrance exams for Lockwood Grammar and ended up at Naughton Marsh. She wanted me to take A-levels at the nearby sixth form, but I rebelled by going to Barton Tech. It didn't help much. I barely passed my B.Tech in business technology. A university degree had been out of reach. 10 years later, I was at the highest point I was ever going to reach at Wilton Danborough Business Consultancy, or anywhere else. I wasn't motivated to return to studying or push myself through work experience. I felt underappreciated at work, bullied by my micromanaging supervisor, Philip. The worst part was the comparison to the senior consultants and managers in the firm. They had the flash cars, fancy houses, and expense accounts. What did I have? Nothing. Except Mona. And I did appreciate her, I truly did. Things weren't always perfect between us, but we made it work. We lived on what little we had left after bills, going out to clubs or bars. It wasn't a terrible life, but I did wish for more. My lunchtime walks were a highlight of my day. I had several favorite routes, but my absolute favorite was along the Mead to Bycastle. I could just reach the edge of the old castle before I had to turn back. The humpbacked footbridge and the well marked my turning point, though today, I lingered instead of hurrying back. I had received an email from Philip before leaving. He wanted to see me after lunch, and I dreaded it. I knew he would find something to criticize. I stared moodily into the well, at the twin circles of dark water and reflected sky. I checked my watch. I was going to be late, but I didn't turn away. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a 50-pence piece. It was more than I'd usually throw away, but I didn't think about it long enough to put it back. I balanced it on my crooked finger and focused past it at the water 20 feet below. Then, flicking my thumb, I watched the coin tumble, over and over, down into the depths. I let out a small, cynical chuckle and muttered, "I wish I could be one of the senior managers at work." As soon as the coin hit the water, I felt a surge of heartburn that immediately made me forget the silly wish I'd made. I clutched my stomach, wincing, regretting the sandwiches I'd rushed through at my desk before my walk. Grumbling at my bad luck, I hurried back, crossing the little humpbacked footbridge and walking along the river path behind the multi-story car parks. There was a small gateway that led into the outdoor dining areas behind the shopping center, and another one on the far side that led to Meadside Business Park. Wilton Danborough occupied the 5th, 6th, and 7th floors of the Empire Building, overlooking the river. My open-plan office, unsurprisingly, was right in the center of the building with only overhead fluorescent lights to brighten it. By the time I reached the front of the building, I was still feeling terrible and was a full 5 minutes late. Cursing myself, I exited the lift, sweaty and damp, and collided with Philip, my supervisor. "Where do you think you're going, Lionel?" he snapped. "Sorry, I lost track of time." I tried to rush past him to my desk. "Again? What a surprise." "Sorry, it won't happen again." "Where do you think you're going now?" I hesitated. "To my desk? We have a meeting." "Have you forgotten that too?" "No, sorry." Where would you like to?" "My office." He turned on his heel and marched away. I followed, rubbing my stomach, wondering how my day could possibly get worse. Philip was waiting in his office, arms crossed, face set in irritation when I arrived. "Shut the door." I did and sat down. "Did I tell you to sit?" No. "Sorry." I stood again. "I'm kidding, sit down." I sat, feeling awkward. "Anytime you're ready, Lionel." "I don't have all day." "Right." "Sorry." He began reprimanding me for my tardiness at lunch and then criticized my low productivity compared to others. The data he was looking at came from a report I knew had been run incorrectly. But when I tried to point it out, he sighed heavily. "What planet are you on, Lionel?" Sorry? What? Are you saying I don't know how to do my job?" "No, not at all." "How do you think I feel when you tell me I don't know how to run my reports?" I cleared my throat. Well. Maybe if you spent the time you waste questioning me on doing your own job right, the data in the report wouldn't show you as a bad worker." I winced again. My chest and stomach were in turmoil. "Are you even listening to me?" "Yes." "Sorry. I don't know why I waste my time on you." I sat uncomfortably, unsure of what to say and afraid that anything I did say would spark more hostility. "Well, go on then," he said. "I told you to leave." I frowned, sure he hadn't. "Just try doing a better job next time," he said. I left his office and leaned against the wall outside, breathing heavily. I took a few staggered steps before leaning against the wall again. My chest felt tight. It could have been a heart attack. This didn't feel like any indigestion I'd had before. Next door was a meeting room. I stumbled into it, leaning against the desk, struggling to catch my breath. I felt awful, and the sensation was only getting worse, creeping up my back. I was in trouble. I needed an ambulance, urgently. But when I tried to call for help, all that came out was a hoarse rasp, not even words. I retched, the lump in my throat growing, then retched again. I bent over, clutching my stomach with both hands. Then, out of nowhere, a blinding flash of white light burst around me, and I was thrown back upright, staggering as a fierce wind filled my clothes and hair. The next moment, the wind and light disappeared, and I realized the pain was gone. The tightness in my chest and stomach was completely gone. I felt perfectly fine, though I was still panting for air. I looked down, my hand instinctively reaching for my stomach, and my eyes widened in alarm as shoulder-length blonde hair fell into view beside my face. My gaze shifted to my bare legs from the knees down, smooth and hairless, and the low-heeled shoes I was wearing. I blinked, confused, and looked up at the glass walls of the office. I was wearing a skirt, a blue skirt, and a matching jacket. My body had changed completely. I gaped. I had breasts. My body was no longer the same, everything felt different. Whatever had just happened had transformed me into a woman. My rapid breathing began to slow, but my body was still charged with the electric rush of adrenaline. I reached out, touching different parts of myself to confirm if this was real. I raised my arms, turned them over, twisted at the waist to glance behind me, ran my fingers through my new hair, and felt my face, chest, stomach, thighs, legs, and hands. I had transformed into a woman. Completely. And not just any woman, definitely not a young, slim one. Though I couldn't be entirely sure without seeing my new face, based on the clothes, the shape, and the feel of my hands. I was middle-aged. The body I now inhabited was full-figured but not overly large. My thighs and calves were rounded, my hips and stomach creating a shape reminiscent of a pear. My breasts were pillowy, and I felt a surprising sensation when I touched them. As for my hands, they weren't small, but they were unmistakably feminine, with polished nails and slender fingers. My hair had grown long, reaching the base of my neck and curling inward, with a strand hanging down diagonally to brush over my right eye. And my clothes! I was wearing a blue women's business suit, knee-length skirt, a jacket with sleeves that barely reached my elbows, and matching shoes. Underneath the jacket was a white blouse with a wide neckline that revealed a smooth patch of chest, but no hint of cleavage. The roughness of stubble had completely vanished from my cheeks. My skin now felt soft and smooth under my touch. The whole situation was mind-boggling. How could this possibly have happened? And then, as if the question itself triggered the realization, the answer hit me with such certainty that I knew without a doubt it was true. There was no room for skepticism. How could there be? In a world as mundane as this, with only one surreal moment standing out, there could only be one explanation. The wishing well. My wish. I vividly recalled that moment, the 50-pence piece balanced on my finger, watching it spin as it fell and splashed into the black water below. I had wished to be a senior manager at my firm. But the wish hadn't merely changed my job, it had changed me to fit that role. There wasn't a blonde female manager at the firm, so I hadn't been turned into a duplicate of someone else. But surely, this was the next best thing. Oh my God, I whispered, placing my hand over my breast. It came true. But I didn't mean for it to be like this. I didn't want to be a woman. Just then, the meeting room doors swung open, and two people I recognized from the office walked in. They were both senior managers, a man and a woman. As they walked in, they gave me nothing more than a brief glance before starting to circle the oval meeting table. There was no strong reaction. The woman gave a small smile, and I couldn't help but smile back, though it was hesitant and automatic. "Are you sitting here, Miranda?" asked the man, Ben Kingston, sales manager, if I remembered correctly. I turned to face him, and he was looking right at me. My lips moved awkwardly as I glanced down at the neat stack of papers and the iPad marking someone's place at the far side of the table. Yes. He offered a polite smile and sat in the seat next to mine. Good. If the old man drones on, we can write notes to each other. He and the woman chuckled, and I managed a half smile. This was insane, but they knew me. And he had called me Miranda? I glanced down at my now distinctly feminine body. They were settling in, laying out their papers, but I just stood there, staring at them, then back down at myself. Another woman came in behind me and began to sit. I vaguely knew her, she was the administration manager, Leah Foster. "Oh, hi, Miranda. How was your lunch? Did you get that dress you were after from Dorothy Perkins in the end?" No, I replied, marveling at the mature voice that had emerged from my lips, at the way they were treating me, like I really was one of them. I decided not to. Oh. Shame. When does the sale end? I don't know. She started organizing her papers, and more people filed into the room. They took their seats, but I remained where I stood, utterly unsure of what to do, confused beyond belief. I felt like running, like screaming, but I didn't. It somehow felt normal. My heart raced when I heard the voice of the company president, Richard Wilton, talking and laughing with the VP. I stared as they walked in, still joking, and took their seats around the now almost full table. Mr. Wilton caught my eye. Are you joining us, Miranda? I glanced at the empty seat with the iPad and papers, then back at him. Everyone was looking at me. Yes. Of course, I said, and cautiously made my way to my seat, bracing myself for some massive reaction or even another magical flash. But nothing happened. People were just sitting down, getting ready for the meeting. No one seemed to be looking at me oddly. It felt absurd to just go along with this, but what else could I do? I was completely flummoxed by the situation. Mr. Wilton's PA entered to record the minutes, and the meeting began, starting with the minutes from the previous week. I had always wanted to be important enough to attend this kind of review meeting, but I never expected my wish to come true in such a bizarre and unexpected way. The president prompted the accounts manager to give his report on the upcoming budget, detailing recent analyses and projections for the coming months. After that, the focus shifted to the next manager, who discussed his department's output and challenges. I sat, wide-eyed, trying to process that this was actually happening to me. As the meeting moved around the table, I began to realize where this was heading. I was at the end of the line. They were going to want to hear my report, and I had no idea what my job was. By the time I understood the significance of this, I could feel the ominous sense of doom creeping closer. It was nearly my turn. I frantically flipped through the papers in front of me, looking for something, anything, that would give me a clue about what to say. There were figures and employee names. They looked like wage or job grade data. Beneath them, there were a couple of employee files, one of which was my supervisor's, Philip. It included his photo from the employee board, his original application form, various documents, and his contract. A post-it note was attached, labeled possible in sharp handwriting. The sense of impending doom grew stronger. 2 people had gone before me, and then it was my turn, the man and woman who had entered before me. I tapped the iPad to activate it and stared at the spreadsheet on the screen. More figures and names. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, noticing again the long hair cascading down my shoulders, the feminine hands, the breasts, the business suit. I couldn't do this. How could I? I had to get out of here. The woman who had first called me Miranda finished her update, and the sales manager beside me began discussing the challenges his team had faced in bringing in new business. Should I get up? Say I didn't feel well? But then what? I was a woman. A middle-aged woman. The sales manager's tone began to wind down. I could tell he was finishing. I panicked, flipping through the papers in front of me, desperately searching for something I could understand. Then, suddenly, something clicked. I understood it. I knew what these papers meant. I understood their relevance. I flipped back to the iPad spreadsheet. It connected with the papers. I understood it all. Miranda? I froze. The president had said my new name. He was looking directly at me. The room had fallen silent, and everyone was watching me. Mr. Wilton smiled. Do you have your report? I glanced back at the papers in front of me. I understood them. I could do this. It was insane, but I could handle it if I just got a grip on myself. Yes, I said, feeling a sense of calm wash over me despite the absurdity of the situation. I knew what I was talking about. It was almost as if there were memories hidden beneath my awareness, just waiting to support what I needed to say. And then, when I spoke, a confident, velvety voice emerged, laced with feminine inflection. We're on track with our proposed cuts, I said. Salary output is falling in line with the projected targets. I believe we'll meet or even exceed the necessary cuts while maintaining optimal service across the company. Most departments are getting close to the new agreed levels, though I'll need to speak with you about your department later, Ned, I added, addressing the consulting manager across the table. He chuckled. I wondered when you'd catch me, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Guilty as charged. Laughter rippled around the table, and I found myself smiling, then turning back to Mr. Wilton. There have been some minor staffing issues, I continued, but nothing major. Although... I glanced down at Philip's file again, realizing the significance of it being here. One of the middle managers, Philip Brooks, has had another grievance filed against him. If we're looking to make cuts in middle management, he's a logical candidate. Though don't quote me on that. Another chuckle spread around the room. All right. Good, Mr. Wilton said. Thanks, Miranda. Keep up the good work. I smiled back, still stunned by how well it had gone, but also by how effortlessly it had flowed from me. Now, when I thought back to the details, there was even more depth to my understanding. It was like I just knew things. It was crazy. Mr. Wilton continued with his ideas to improve communication across the firm, and I found myself settling back into my chair, looking around the room with a growing sense of satisfaction. I had never wanted to be a woman, not in a million years, but there was no denying how good it felt to be sitting there, respected and admired as part of upper management. And being a woman? It didn't feel so strange. It just felt comfortable. This was the weirdest day of my life. It really was. As the meeting wrapped up and people began to file out, I stayed seated, trying to process everything that had just happened. But as Leah, the administration manager who had asked about the dress, reached the door, she paused and said, "We still on for lunch tomorrow?" Sure, I replied, unsure of what else to say. I had no idea if I'd still be a woman by then. She smiled and left, and moments later, the room emptied, leaving me alone again. I gave my body another once-over, still struggling to comprehend the transformation. The strangest part was that, although I recognized the new sensations, my wider body, long hair, and bare lower legs, it didn't feel as foreign as it should have. I didn't feel like an intruder in this body, just like it was mine. But I had to see it properly. I stood up, hesitating when I thought of the iPad and papers. Should I take them? Where would I even go with them? Did I have an office now? Where was it? How would I find out? With no clearer ideas, I decided to leave the papers behind for now and made my way to the door. As I stood and walked toward it, every sensation about my body and clothes came back to me. I moved differently now. I was noticeably heavier, and that had an effect. The skirt, the heels, the sway of my hair, everything felt alien, yet oddly familiar. The slight bounce of my breasts as I walked only added to the strange reality. This is really messed up, I muttered to myself. Across from the meeting room door was a screen that blocked the view to the open-plan office. No one was directly in sight, but I felt extremely self-conscious in this outfit, embarrassed. I wondered if... A young woman rounded the corner and started walking toward me. I immediately recognized her, Gail, the girl who sat next to me. I'd worked with her for 1.5 years, as Lionel. I stood frozen as she came closer, unable to take my eyes off her. When she saw me, she instantly looked away and straightened her posture. As she passed, she glanced up briefly, gave a polite, guarded smile, and then kept walking. I stared after her in shock. She had acted so differently toward this new version of me. It was remarkable. Expected, maybe, but still surprising. I had to find a mirror. I walked past the screen and glanced toward my desk. There was no chair, just boxes of files piled on it. No computer, and Philip was nowhere to be found. I shook my head in disbelief. The bathrooms were near the lift lobby, so I headed toward them, hyper-aware of every sensation in my new body. My face flushed from the embarrassment of being seen like this, but no one reacted strangely. Most people looked busy as I passed, but a couple of braver souls greeted me with a polite, "Good afternoon," said almost deferentially, even nervously. It was strange, feeling this kind of power over people, but at the same time, it felt fantastic. After years of feeling insignificant, this was a change. The 2 bathrooms, male and female, stood side by side. I hesitated, but only for a moment. The choice was obvious, given the skirt I was wearing. I stepped inside and approached the sink, staring in awe at the face in the mirror. I looked like a woman in her mid-40s, plump and mature. The blue skirt suit and formal hairstyle clearly marked me as a middle-aged businesswoman. It was surreal. I couldn't believe that was me, but the reflection mimicked every movement. I had a nice face. It wasn't a face I would have noticed as a potential partner when I was in my old body, but for my new age, I had quite pretty features, angled cheekbones, large eyes, nicely shaped lips. It felt odd to carry so much weight. I shrugged off my jacket, letting it fall to my elbows, revealing the short-sleeved blouse underneath. I turned left and right to examine my plump upper arms. I put the jacket back on. I was a middle-aged businesswoman. There was no denying it. I glanced around the empty stalls, then looked back at myself in the mirror. I'm Miranda Greene, HR manager at Wilton Danborough Business Consultancy. It was chilling. But Greene? That hadn't been my surname before. Was that really my new name? How had I known that? The same way I had known all the details about the report I'd just given? I didn't understand why I was taking this so calmly. Why wasn't I panicking? Where was the fear of losing my identity? Why wasn't I losing my mind? Unless... I nodded, realization hitting me. I had been frustrated with my position in the company for a while now, and now I truly was one of the senior managers. I never would have wished to be a woman, but I couldn't deny that my wish had come true. And that made me intrigued. I wasn't ecstatic to be a 40-something blonde businesswoman, but I wasn't ready to run away screaming either. I wanted to explore this new reality a little more. So, I gave one last look at the reflection of this plump, older woman and left the bathroom to look for my new office, a smile of conflicted anticipation curling on my lips. I decided the easiest way to find my new office was to wander around, acting like I was inspecting things while keeping an eye out for my new name on the door. There were only 4 to 6 offices per floor, with the rest being open plan, so I knew it wouldn't take long. Since I already knew who owned the offices on my level, and none were vacant, I couldn't resist taking a quick walk around the floor. I still felt the odd mix of being strangely comfortable in this new body while sharply aware of the contrast. But I was getting used to the way people saw me now. It felt like wearing a fancy dress costume, like being in disguise as someone else. The moment you step into it, you're acutely aware that people see you differently, but that awareness brings a kind of liberating anonymity. It's freeing to walk around a fancy dress party, knowing no one really knows who you are. This new body of mine was exactly like that, except this costume came with the added bonus of instantly being recognized as someone of authority. It might still be unsettling that I'd been transformed into a woman, 15 or 20 years older, maybe permanently, but it was also thrilling. At first, I worried my old masculine movements would give me away, but I moved with a calm, understated femininity that felt odd at first, until I decided to embrace it. I didn't have the exaggerated swagger of a young girl showing off her newfound femininity, but my arms swung freely as I walked the floor. Normally, I would have greeted coworkers with a nod, cracked a joke, or said hi, but this time, the deference I was getting from people and the growing instincts shaping my behavior made me respond differently. I found myself wearing a cool, professional expression, leaning towards aloofness or sternness. It seemed to affect the way lower-level staff reacted to me, with guilty looks as I passed by. The idea that my brain was changing made me pause for a moment, wondering about the mechanism behind my transformation. There was no doubt about it, my body was that of a mature senior manager. And since my brain was now part of this body, I started to entertain a few related possibilities. My brain hadn't been swapped into this body. It had likely transformed into that of a mature woman. If my clothes and possessions had changed too, if I now had a new job in history, then it seemed likely my brain contained the knowledge of this new identity. I started to wonder if my former male consciousness was still inside this body, gradually adjusting to its new form, attaching itself to the brain and settling in. Perhaps this was why I was slowly gaining an understanding of my new knowledge. My soul was acclimating, and eventually, it would fully connect. When that happened, I would have access to all the memories and thoughts that belonged to this woman. Yet, oddly, I wasn't scared. It was all just speculation for now, and this new form felt too natural to be frightening. It felt contradictory, but why fear being a woman when I already was one? I reached the end of the floor and walked toward the lift, heading up another flight. On that floor, I didn't know anyone, so I didn't linger as long, but I continued to enjoy the way I was perceived and my newfound autonomy. No one was checking up on me or reprimanding me for not working. When I reached the offices on that floor, I saw they were all occupied, but Ben Kingston came out of his office as I approached and gave me a smile. "I'm just heading out," he said. "My wife's been feeling a bit under the weather. She's looking pale. I'm worried about her." "I hope she starts feeling better soon," I replied, then turned back toward the lift. It was on the 7th floor that I found my office, and it was incredible. It was on the corner, with views of tower gates on one side and the river on the other. I knew Wilton had the end corner with river views on two sides, but this was a close second. It was much larger than my old desk on the 5th floor. I felt like a kid in a candy store. I sat in the cushioned chair, grinning to myself. After such a chaotic life, I couldn't believe I finally had a prestigious position. It was a bit unsettling to think about my new female form, but I pushed that unease aside. This was everything I had ever wanted, a real position of authority, the respect that came with it, and the paycheck to match. With my limited education and lack of ambition, I could never have achieved this in a day, but with a careless wish, here I was. The wall was adorned with framed certificates for my newly acquired MA in Management and Human Resources, along with various professional accreditations. If I stayed like this, they would truly be mine. But then a sinking feeling washed over me as I considered the implications. Could I really stay like this? The idea was almost laughable. What about Mona? I hadn't given her much thought since this began, but what would she say when I showed up at our flat looking decades older than her? How could we continue as a couple? We couldn't. And I certainly didn't want to lose nearly 20 years of my life to become a woman. A middle-aged woman, at that. I got up, needing to look at myself again. I slipped off the jacket and examined my fuller arms in the short-sleeved blouse. I hung the jacket on a coat stand near a cupboard and noticed a full-length mirror tucked away in an alcove. I looked at my curvy, mature body, my smooth, hairless legs, the low heels on my feet. I checked my nails. I ran my hand over my pretty, round face and soft hair. This was real. It was completely real. It wasn't going to wear off. This was who I was now. I could try going back to the wishing well and hope it worked again, but unless some divine intervention occurred, it seemed I was stuck in this middle-aged female form, Miranda Greene. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I settled back at my desk, making myself comfortable, when I noticed a young woman sitting near the glass office door, with an intercom on the desk. There was a button on it, so I pressed it, and the woman quickly entered. "Yes, Miranda?" she asked. "Ellen," I said, the name coming to me as I searched for it. "Please go downstairs to 5th floor meeting room A and bring up my notes and iPad." "All right. I'll be right back. And ask Philip Brooks to come and see me while you're down there." "Of course." She nodded respectfully before leaving. I powered up the computer, smiling to myself. This was going to be good. Ellen returned with my things just before Philip showed up, giving me time to review his file. The details inside felt familiar, even though I had never known them as Lionel. It was like seeing the information in the file sparked my memory, and as I skimmed through it, I recalled a remarkably clear picture of this man's career at Wilton Danborough from an HR perspective. I didn't yet remember actual scenes from the life of Miranda, but I suspected that would come soon. For now, the knowledge from my new background was there, accessible as long as I looked for it. Philip knocked nervously, which made me smile. Seeing my smile likely made him even more uncomfortable. "Come in," I gestured for him to enter. "You wanted to see me?" he asked. "Yes, come in, Philip." He shuffled inside, looking the opposite of his usual swaggering, patronizing self. I didn't offer him a seat, and he didn't presume to take one, instead hovering nervously. "As you know," I said, "the company is undergoing significant changes as we direct our resources toward the most profitable areas." "Yes. I've been working hard too." "It can be difficult to strike the right balance when leading such changes," I continued. "That's why we've implemented a consultation period, where every team has been asked to contribute to the process." I knew for a fact that every suggestion from that consultation had been ignored by upper management, but now, from the other side, I understood why. Allowing the ill-educated workforce to influence company policy was ridiculous. Still, change management guidelines suggested giving staff the illusion of input to maintain morale. As I paused, Philip grew more uncomfortable. "Let me get to the point," I said. "We're consolidating middle management positions. Our analysis shows that redistributing team leaders will free up funds that can be used to improve other areas. The executive lounge, for example, is in poor condition and hasn't been refurbished in almost 18 months. Yes, I see," Philip said. "I've called you up here today to discuss a very generous voluntary severance package we've developed. I'd like you to consider it." "Voluntary severance?" "Yes. You'll be adequately compensated to cover a couple of months while you transition to a new phase in your career, and we can then move forward with improving conditions for everyone here." Philip gave a strained smile, then cleared his throat. "But it's voluntary, right? You're offering this to all the middle managers?" "The offer will be extended to others if necessary," I replied, "but you're the first person I'm speaking to. And if I choose not to take it, you're free to stay in your position if you wish," I said. However, I let the word linger in the air. Philip was sweating. I let him stew for a moment. "I've been reviewing your file," I said, straightening the papers on my desk. "Given the high number of complaints from your team members, should you choose to stay, we will undoubtedly start the grievance procedure. The outcome is uncertain, but it's worth considering how much easier it will be to find another job if you leave here on good terms than voluntarily. Being fired for gross misconduct could haunt your career for years." I smiled. The words flowed from my lips so smoothly and with such cold precision that it left me reeling too. But on the other hand, this man had made my life miserable since I met him, and it felt incredibly satisfying to finally take control and exact some well-earned revenge. "Well, I'll think about it," he stammered. "Please do," I replied. "But if I could have your decision by the end of the day on Monday, I'd appreciate it." After Philip left the office, I sat at my desk, gazing out at the river, practically beaming. It felt incredible to finally have the power to do that to him after all the bullying, truly being able to take control. I felt a rush of satisfaction. The longer I stayed like this, the more comfortable I felt in my new role. If I was right about my spirit theory, my soul was gradually adapting to this new body, and I was continuing to assimilate the knowledge that came with it. I returned to the computer, easily navigating through the data files and folders. I already knew where everything was. I glanced at my Outlook calendar, seeing meetings from earlier in the day and scheduled ones throughout the week. Miranda Greene hadn't existed in the company before lunchtime, her position had been vacant, but now, reality had shifted. Though I couldn't picture these meetings exactly, I had access to the knowledge of what had been discussed and what decisions had been made. This wasn't a life I had to sneak around in like a spy, pretending to be someone else. I was an HR manager now, and the intricacies of the female experience wouldn't be a mystery to me either. Feminine hygiene, makeup, the ongoing beauty routines, none of it held any fear. It would all come as naturally as managing. I pushed back my chair and grabbed my bare knees, lifting my legs to examine them. Was I really considering staying this way? I didn't want to be a woman. I didn't want to be 46 next birthday. Did I? What about the lost years? Death would be much closer now. But then, women lived longer than men, didn't they? And I had always eaten junk food. Maybe this was my route to a longer life. And I knew for certain that I would never have reached this position as Lionel. Never. I would have just gotten older and older in that same dead-end role, hitting the ceiling of my grade, and then stagnating until I passed early from sheer despair. It was an enormous decision to make. For now, though, I got to work, going through the emails in my inbox and responding to them, delegating tasks to various members of the HR team whose names and roles came to mind with barely any thought. I received a call from Leah Foster, and we met for coffee in the executive lounge. We chatted about women's fashion and makeup for half an hour while I sat with my legs crossed at the knee, completely at ease. The knowledge of these topics seemed second nature to me now, and I found myself confidently offering strong opinions on what worked and what didn't. Leah was fun to talk to, and I found it much easier to connect with her than with my new PA, Ellen. Ellen was on a completely different level. Her view of the world was so limited, coming from the bottom of the hierarchy. I was thriving in a way I never had before. I'd never felt so happy or so confident. After our chat, I returned to my office and got to work reviewing some new job descriptions written by one of my subordinates for positions on the 8th floor. I tooted to myself as I made corrections and read, noting the poor understanding of employment law. When I glanced at the clock, it was 6:30, and most of the floor was in darkness. The rain had been on and off throughout the day, and it was only by luck that I had made it to the well and back without getting drenched at lunchtime. Only luck. With the rain clouds in the hour, it was starting to get dark. I shut down the computer, then, after a brief thought, decided to pack my briefcase with files to go through over the weekend so I could hit the ground running on Monday morning. That made me pause, standing in front of the floor-length windows, looking at my pale reflection. My arms were wrapped around my generous chest. Being this woman from minute to minute was one thing. It was mad and exciting at the same time. I was living out a twisted version of my deepest desire. But to plan for a new day? A new week? That was another matter. What about my real life? What about Mona? I pursed my lips, frowning as I looked down at my reflection, at my legs, the skirt, the wide hips, the swollen pear-shaped stomach, the round shoulders, and the blonde hair. And then, my troubled face. Of course, I couldn't stay like this. Of course, I couldn't. It was ridiculous. I had to go back to the wishing well and try to fix this, turn my life back to what it was meant to be. Feeling conflicted and melancholy, I slipped the blue suit jacket on, straightened the sleeves, then grabbed the handbag I knew contained my car keys and headed for the door. I paused in the doorway, looking back. I just couldn't decide, no matter how obvious the choice seemed. Before I could resist, I walked back to the desk, grabbed the briefcase full of files. Just in case, I muttered to myself, and left my office, heading for the lifts. I decided to drive to the well. It was getting late, and Mona would surely be worrying. Besides, it was too far to walk in these heels, not to mention the fact that this new body of mine wasn't built for too much exercise. As I left the building and stepped outside, I was sharply reminded of how feminine I looked, my heels clicking on the pavement, the slight sway in my walk, the cool breeze against my calves, and my hair fluttering in the wind. My strength wasn't what it used to be. The briefcase full of files made my arm ache, but strangely, that only made me feel more at peace. It was all so strange, uncharted territory. The car park was mostly empty, but when I reached my spot, I frowned. My car was gone. I looked around, then realized that my new persona might drive a different car. I rummaged through my handbag until I found a thick electronic car key and pressed the button. 2 beeps echoed from somewhere behind me. I turned to see the last flash of an indicator on a red sporty convertible, parked in one of the reserved spots near the building. I smiled and shook my head, amused. The surprises just kept coming, and this new life was feeling more seductive by the minute. I tossed my briefcase and handbag onto the passenger seat and revved the engine. This wasn't some cheap knockoff sports car, it had real power under the hood. I could never have afforded something like this in my former life. I drove out of the car park, merging onto the feeder road back toward Banbury Way. I artfully took the third exit from the roundabout and sped down the dual carriageway toward the next junction. The town center was lit up on either side, tower gates to my right, pedestrianized areas to the left. I joined the post-rush hour traffic and turned right at the roundabout. Bycastle hadn't changed much in centuries, with the listed buildings keeping modernizations at bay. It took me a while to make my way through, and even then, I wasn't right by the well. I parked on the street and took the path that led up to the riverbank. To the left, the castle was a dark silhouette against the evening sky. I was relieved that the rain had stopped. As I walked down the path to the right, I finally spotted the well as I rounded a few bushes, halting in my tracks. Standing there again, the weight of my decision hit me hard. I wasn't even sure if it would work again. Could it really be the wishing well that had changed me? What else could it have been? Nocton didn't have some magical force granting wishes left and right. I shrugged. All I could do was try again. It felt like the only fair thing to do for Mona. She didn't want to lose me, did she? I walked slowly toward the well, thinking about the afternoon's events, the look on Philip's face when I had called him out, the respect I'd received as a senior manager, and perhaps most importantly, the sense that for once in my life, I hadn't wasted my education. I actually had a career now, a role that made an impact. The interior of the well was shrouded in complete darkness beneath the approaching evening and the brooding clouds. I couldn't distinguish the difference between the old brick walls and the water far below. I pursed my lips, then reluctantly opened my handbag and reached into my purse. I hadn't even realized how naturally I had brought it with me. A shiny 50-pence piece sat waiting for me. I took it out and held it up, letting it catch the light from the town center. Would it really work? Was it as simple as making a counter-wish to reverse everything? What wish should I make? To be Lionel Humber again? The same old Lionel with nothing to his name but a pretty girlfriend he didn't deserve? I sighed deeply. I didn't mind going back to Mona, but the thought of returning to my old job filled me with dread. Especially now, knowing the likely wave of layoffs in that department. I couldn't bear to go back to that life after experiencing this new, much more important role. I sighed again. What if I just stayed like this a little longer? What could that hurt? I paused to consider that thought. I liked the idea of staying this way. Very much. Being a woman just felt so natural now. It would feel strange to go back to being a man. And I could always make a decision later, next month, next year. I had longed for a position like this my entire life, and even though it was twisted, I still wanted it. I didn't know why I didn't find it repulsive. But I didn't. What if I just stayed like this a little longer? The wishing well had been there for centuries. There was no rush to make a decision. It would be foolish to hurry back now that I had this rare opportunity. I closed my fist around the 50-pence piece and nodded to myself. Yes. That was it. The decision was made. I put the coin back in my purse and zipped it safely inside my handbag. I would stay like this for a while longer. Just a little longer. Until I had enough. That was all. I smiled slightly, questioning my decision one last time. No. This felt right. It was what I wanted. I looked down at my body again, the blue skirt, the jacket, the matching heels. Then, tucking my handbag under my arm, I began walking back toward my new sports car. I made my way back to the Banbury Way and crossed straight over at the roundabout, joining the upper ring road. The road wound around Breton Hill, climbing over it at the foot of Chauncey, then plummeting down toward Ockham Trading Estate. I passed it and took the next exit, driving through the streets of Ashfield. A lot of the houses here had been converted into flats. It was the only place south of Barton where Mona and I could afford to live, and it still had a small garden. Breton was cheaper, but too noisy. As I neared our street, anxiety began to settle in. How could I show up like this? What would she say when I explained that I was her boyfriend, now in the most convincing drag the world had ever seen? Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I should just stay away and send her an email saying I needed to be away for a week or two. Or worse, what if she didn't even recognize me anymore? My old identity seemed to have vanished at work, and it was likely the same at home. I pulled up to the front of the flat and looked up at the windows. The lights were off. I pursed my lips and stepped out of the car. There was a "For Let" sign in the front garden. On the little square at the top, it said, "Ground floor flat." My shoulders sagged. My home was gone. Mona was gone, probably off living the life she would have led if she had never met me. She was probably better off without me. I should just let it go. I sighed. Maybe this was how it was meant to be. I'd always felt out of my league with her. She was so beautiful. She could have been a model easily. I got back in the car and sat there, trying to figure out what to do. Then, an idea struck me. If I had a job in this new life, surely I had a place to live as well. I rummaged through my new womanly handbag and found a thick envelope with a utility bill inside, probably kept for identity purposes. I opened it and raised an eyebrow when I saw the address, Nunnery Lane, Wilder's Pool, Naughton. Not bad. Not bad at all. I started the car and pulled off. I retraced my route, heading back the way I came, over the hill and down the other side. Wilder's Pool was one of the nicer areas in Naughton. Not all of it, but most of it was filled with large family homes with decent-sized gardens. It was a pleasant, affluent neighborhood. I took the exit at the Redbush roundabout and drove through the suburban streets until I reached the posh houses of Wilder's Pool. I wasn't familiar with the road name, rarely had I been this way, so I drove slowly, keeping an eye out for the right address. My thoughts were running wild, trying to predict what I might find. For all I knew, I had a husband and kids in this new life. I glanced down at my hand and noticed, for the first time, the pair of rings on my left hand's third finger. I couldn't believe I hadn't spotted them before. But the reality of it hit me hard. A husband? Really? Becoming a woman was one thing, taking on such a powerful job at work was another. But sharing my life with a man? That made me uneasy. My train of thought was interrupted when I saw the road sign with the right name. I turned and drove down the street, following it until I found the right number and parked. Now that I was here, my nerves began to rattle. Anything could be waiting for me in there. The house was large and well kept. It had a spacious front garden, off-road parking, and a garage. There was a wide dormer window in the attic and plenty of space inside. It was everything I'd ever wanted for my life. I'd never planned for it to turn out this way, but there was an itch in me to see it through. I had to know what it would be like to step into this life, to meet my husband and even try living with him. I held my breath and got out of the car. The lights were on inside, and the house looked welcoming. I couldn't wait to see it. I opened the gate and walked up the path, then hesitated at the door. I had a key, didn't I? I fumbled through my bag, pulled it out with trembling hands, and inserted it into the lock. It turned easily, and the door swung open. I stepped inside the spacious hall. It was decorated with wood paneling and tasteful decor. It felt like paradise. No one was in sight, and I couldn't hear anything. "Hello?" I called, my voice faint and unsure. I cleared my throat and said it louder, "Hello?" From somewhere deeper in the house, I heard something. "Is anyone here?" I called again. Footsteps came closer, and my heart leapt to my throat. Then, a man appeared in the doorway, wearing a suit and tie. He had a mustache, a balding head, and enough wrinkles to put him in his late 40s, at least, considering his potbelly. He stared at me for a moment, and I stared back. Was this really the man I was supposed to live with? Sleep with? How would I feel about that? Then, in a gravelly voice, he spoke, and what he said stopped my heart. Lionel? Is that you? I froze, not sure I had heard him correctly. How could he know who I really was? Then the truth hit me like a ton of bricks, and I gasped, Mona? I knew it, the man exclaimed. I bloody well knew it. Mona? Is that really you? The beautiful, slender girl with the long legs and perfect breasts? You did this to me, didn't you? He snarled. What? Don't lie to me. I can see it in your face. But Mona? Is that really you? Yes, it's me, the balding man shouted. I turned into this afternoon. And you had something to do with it, didn't you? Mona. Wait. Just listen to me, I stammered, not knowing what to think. I know you did it, he cried. Somehow. He grabbed my jacket, pulling me forward and thrusting his face into mine. Now bloody well turn us back. If you appreciated this story and wish to show your support, don't forget to join me on Patreon for exclusive content.